Friends, my name's Joe Strube, and I work in high school ministry here at Central. And I'd like to share something about you, something actually that many people already know about me. I laugh kind of loudly. I just do. I laugh very loudly. And in fact, I also laugh loudly in movie theaters. Unfortunately, I often laugh when no one else is laughing in movie theaters. Often, and is he here? My son Isaac has his hand over my mouth, covering my mouth up as I laugh at something on the screen that only I find funny. And so that's part of my experience watching movies. Another part of my experience is something most of you wouldn't know because it's a little bit more subdued. It's not as loud. Is how I participate in the action sequences. Because I do participate in the action sequences. So, and I think other people do this as well because I see it, but this is what it's like for me. So something's happening. It's a sword fight. It's the last action scene. The hero's about to save the day, and there's this tension level in the movie, and there's tension in my muscles because I'm all tensed up, and I'm shifting my arms, I'm shifting my legs as though I'm actually there in the spot of the hero, trying to protect them, trying to defend them, saving the day. I also do it while I'm watching football. I do it at the end of basketball games. Why? Because I'm so invested that I want to be there. I want to be that hero. I want to be able to make that shot. And when I hear the story of Daniel, chapter 1, I have a similar kind of feeling. So we just saw chapter 1 performed, and this was our introduction to Daniel and his friends. They are our heroes. We saw that Nebi, who lived over here, came over to here, to Judah, where Jehoiakim Schmidt apparently lived, and laid siege and conquered Judah. And then he took Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. He took them, and Daniel and his friends, he took them back to Babylon. He basically abducted them as the spoils of war. He took them to a strange land, and despite all the pressure that they were under, and you saw some of that pressure here, all the pressure they were under to conform, they still stood firm for God. And when we look at Daniel chapter 1, when I look at Daniel chapter 1, when I look at Daniel and his friends, I say, I want to be like that. When the moment comes, I want to be able to stand for Jesus. That's what I see. That idea, this idea that I want to be like Daniel. I want to be able to stand in his place when that moment comes. That brings us to our fourth product placement of the day. This is a bag from McDonald's. You know that. I'm going to explain that in just a second. And here, hopefully not spilling out. Well, friends, that's a Big Mac. It is a Big Mac. Doesn't look as pretty, but we're going to leave it like that. So here's what I have to say about McDonald's. McDonald's was a huge part of my life growing up because my dad worked for McDonald's back when they had their own service repair group. And he would go around, he'd work all over through Northern Virginia and throughout Maryland. And here's the deal. My dad would bring home all the toys from Happy Meals. We would get all those toys, all the leftover ones. There were lots of them floating around, little sponges of Grimace. They were like purple sponges floating around. We would get all those different toys. And this was a big deal because this was a little bit long time ago. This was back in the 80s. And back in the 80s, before Starbucks, before Chipotle, before Target was around, but it wasn't a thing, there was McDonald's, and McDonald's was king. And the king of McDonald's was the Big Mac. And what was it about that sandwich? There was something about the Big Mac that kept people coming back. You would come back again and again and again. Why for the Big Mac? You guys know why? Can I get a witness? It is, and then between those two all beef patties, special sauce. There it is. It says special sauce, right? There was a special sauce in the Big Mac that made it a special burger. People kept going back and back, and that's what drove it for McDonald's. And for us, I just want to bring that up. It was the special sauce that made it taste so good, and I want to offer to you that there's a secret sauce to Daniel that makes him the hero that we want to be more like in our own lives. And to see what's unique about Daniel, let's look at a story. Looking at a story, I want to talk to you about a story of the Bible. In fact, you could say it's one of the stories of the Bible. That God is building a family. In Genesis chapter 1, we see that God planted a garden, and in the garden, he planted Adam and Eve, and then he walked with them to be with him, to be with his people. And we know that didn't quite work out the way he had hoped. And so Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram out, and he says, Abram, I'm going to make you the father of multitudes, and your people will be my special people, and this will be my family. And we're going to see, we know that Daniel, in part of his story, he is one of the multitudes from Abram. But we see this is a continuing story throughout the Bible, because in John chapter 1, he says, but as many as received him, to those who received Jesus, he gave the right to become children of God. God is building a family, and that's part of Daniel's story, because Daniel's life before we meet him is at home, growing up and being educated in Judah as part of God's family at the end of a particular time in the history of Israel that we call the divided kingdom. And what did it mean for Daniel that he was a part of the family of God? It meant that God was a provider, a sustainer, a protector. It also meant that God was near, that God was actually close. That's what it meant for him to be a part of the family of God. And we're told in verse 2, we see that the Lord delivered Judah over to Nebi, and we said that Daniel and his friends have everything they have ever known as part of God's family slowly stripped away. That's what we see in the next couple verses. The first thing to be taken away is their sense of place. You see, they were over here, but they were taken captive over here, and they were dragged over to Babylonia. They lost their sense of place. Their home was taken away. All that they had ever known, and they're living in a different land. It's important for us to remember that place mattered to the people of Judah. Place mattered. Their place on earth, that plot of land they called Judah, had been given to them by God. And their place on earth was the place where God actually met with people in the temple. So to be far away from Judah, way over here, was to be far away from God. Far away from my sustainer, my protector. Far away from the God who, when I was there, I was near. So we ask the question, they might ask the question, can God work in my life when I'm so far away? Can he protect me here? All the things they knew were being stripped away from them, taken away from them. And it wasn't just the actual act of worship in the temple that would put God at the forefront of their minds. It was their whole way of life, their whole structure of life. You see, they would have holidays. And all the holidays that they had were built around reminding them that God was the sustainer, a protector, a provider for them, reminding them that God was close and that he was for them. And in fact, not just the holidays they celebrated, but how they celebrated the holidays and how they went through every day was meant to remind them of these things. It was to remind them they are part of the family of God and what it meant to be a part of the family of God. In fact, even their names were a part of this structure. Daniel's name meant God is my judge. Hananiah's name, the Lord shows grace. Mishael's name is who is what God is. And Azariah, the Lord helps. And we see that even these names are taken away and they're given different names. All their structures, all the things that they had built their identities on, that were built into their lives to remind them of who they are and who God was for them. All these things were being stripped away. And these boys were just 15 or so years old. Just 15 or so years old. With everything being taken away, this brings us to the king's table, the royal food, the Wegmans and the Diet Coke that they were offered and that they were to be fed upon. You see, Nebi stripped everything away for a certain reason. He wanted to take all of that identity away, and he wanted to make them good citizens of Babylon. He wanted to make them good workers for them. So he would take it all, he would take them away, he would take the best and the brightest, which we saw they were. He would take them to Babylon, and then they would train them, they would retrain them in all the ways of Babylon, taking them away from their home, taking their future, and then adding some things, certainly giving them new types of clothing, giving them new haircuts, and then to seal the deal, he gives them food. Not just any food, he gives them the royal food, the food from his table. And this is the best food and wine there is. You see, Babylon's on top of the world right now. Babylon is an empire, and Babylon's winning. So the food at the king's table in Babylon, that's some good food. But to eat this food was to become Nebi's man. It's the king's table. If you eat from it, then he becomes your provider. He becomes your sustainer. And you become, if you will, a part of his family. To eat at that table would be a declaration of loyalty to that king. In a certain sense, it's like changing jerseys. You play for one team, and now you're going to play for another. Sitting at that table and eating that food would be to say yes to Nebi. But just like when you change jerseys, you're saying, yes, I'm going to put on this jersey. That means you're taking another one off. It's saying yes to Nebuchadnezzar, but then it's saying no to the God of Judah, the God he had grown up knowing, the God that his whole life was built around remembering, the God who had been his sustainer, his protector, the God who was near, the God who was close. So Daniel sees that he needs to answer a question. He's far from home, and all his structures are taken away, and he has to answer the question, who am I and who am I going to be? 15-year-old boy. Daniel and his friends. Am I to stand for Yahweh, or do I become Nebi's man? Verse 8, we see that Daniel had resolved in his heart not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Daniel says, I'm going to stand with God. I'm going to stand with him. And he's making a choice about his identity. He's making a choice about who he is going to be. There's a story in Jeremiah chapter 35 that might help us understand this role of identity and our actions and how they all interplay and who we choose to be. In Jeremiah 35, Jeremiah is going to throw a party as an object lesson for the nation. He's going to throw a party for a specific group of people. The name of that group of people, it's a specific family. It's the Rechabites. And he's going to throw a party for them, and it's a special party, and it's a drinking party. There's going to be a lot of wine at that party. He just wants everybody to show up, and he wants them to throw down. And so he goes out, he tells the servants, I want you to put all the food out, and I want you to put the bowls of wine out. I want you to put the best stuff out, the best pitchers, and a bunch of empty cups. And he says, okay, it's all set up. Now I want you to go get the Rechabites, invite them in. Just bring the whole family. And they bring them all in. He's having this special party for them. And he says, all right, you're here. I'm so glad you're here. I want to have this great party. Come on, guys, have some wine. And they're like, no, we can't. Jeremiah's like, why can't you? Come on, have some wine. It's really good wine. Come on, why can't you? He says, no, we can't. And they go on to say, we can't do this because our great-great-great-great-grandfather says we're going to be a special kind of tribe. It's going to be a couple of things that identify us, that make us who we are. One of those things is going to be we don't drink any wine. The other is we're going to live in tents. And so for all these years since that great-great-great-great-grandfather, we've never drunk any wine, and we have only lived in tents. So Jeremiah, if we drink your wine right now, that means I'm not a part of my family. That changes who I am. It changes who we are. Daniel was in the same place. To say yes to the king's food would change who he was. Would change his relationship to the God of Judah. It would change his relationship to Nebuchadnezzar as well, because then he would become loyal to him. So what we see is that Daniel is choosing God over Nebuchadnezzar despite all the pressures he might face. And in verse 10, we see, so Daniel had made that request, right? He said, okay, so I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stand firm. I'm going to stand up with God. I'm not going to do this. And then so I have a request. So he goes to Ashpenaz and he says, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you do something for me? I don't want to eat these things. We don't want to participate in this food. Can you do something for us? Can we just have some vegetables? Maybe some lentils. Can you give me some beans? These are 15-year-old boys. And verse 10 shows us how audacious this action is. Because what does Ashpenaz say? He says, okay, I like you, Daniel. I really do. And you see, it tells us that God had caused Ashpenaz to have favor on Daniel. He says, okay, Daniel, you might be my favorite. But if I do this thing you're asking of me, if I do this thing, the king's going to have my head. So not only is it being stripped away, not only is it a moment of identity choice for Daniel, is he making a choice, but it's a life or death situation because the king had made an order, and now Daniel is going against it. He's looking to go against it. And this is just a 15-year-old boys. So what does Daniel do? He says, please test us. To the guard, he says, please test us for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables. What do we see in Daniel? We see for Daniel, just in that test, he says he knows in 10 days God is going to show himself faithful. You see, this is a test. This is a test that's happening here. And in the test, there's a story, and it's a story about who's in control. You see, if God is in control, they're going to eat the vegetables and they're going to do well. And if God is in control, what's the story? The story that is that God is in control. He made us. He provides for us. He sustains us, protects us, and God holds our future. That's the story. That's actually the story that Daniel's choosing. If Daniel, the other side of the test is that they go on the vegetables and that God doesn't show himself faithful, and they don't end up passing the test. What do we see? That Nebi is in control, and that the God you speak of doesn't exist. For all of us, as we go through life, we're choosing stories. We're choosing which story we're going to live. We choose the story that Daniel chose, that God is in control and he is able to be faithful, or we can choose, you know what? Maybe there is a God, but he's not able to handle this part of my life. He can't handle money, so I have to handle the money, and I can't really trust God with that. Or you know what? God's wonderful, but it's kind of sentimental, and that's great. So it's really, I need to be in control. I can't really trust him for those things. And we are all choosing a story. Daniel chose a story where God is in control and he is able to be faithful. And at the end of it, they looked better than anyone else. And we know it's not because of the vegetables. God was at work. You thought I forgot about the McDonald's, didn't you? That I forgot about this Big Mac that the reality is I bought it last night. I didn't. So what was the secret sauce? What was the secret sauce? How was Daniel able to do what he did? I'm going to show you. You see, we're all, well, not me, you guys are all, you're participating in that secret sauce just a little bit anyways, because you're all sitting down. It's like a chair. You can watch me. Okay, here we go. Ready? I'm going to sit. What am I doing when I'm sitting? When I'm using the chair? I'm trusting, right? Like all of you are. You're sitting on chairs. You're trusting that chair is going to hold you up. That's just it. You're trusting that chair is going to sustain you for the period of time in which your legs are no longer supporting you, right? There's a choice. Am I going to support myself, or am I going to allow God to support me? That's it. Daniel is sitting in what work is he doing? What work am I doing with the chair? I'm not doing anything. The stool's doing all the work. For you, you're not doing anything. The chair's doing all the work. The chair is holding you up. The chair is sustaining you. The same way with Daniel. Daniel trusted God. Daniel trusted God. And when we trust him, we just rest in him. We just sit down and we rest in him, and God does the work. And when I can trust God to be faithful, when I can trust that God will hold me up, what can stop me? When I realize that I don't need to protect myself, I don't need to control my reputation, I don't need to work through my fears because I can overcome all of those fears, because I can simply rest in God, that is simply the way that we live. This is that secret sauce. This is what made Daniel able to go to Ashpenaz in the first place and say, you know what, I can't do this. I need to stand for God. What was he doing right there? Even in that moment when he was choosing God, he's like, you know what, I know God holds my future. I know God holds my future, so I'm going to stand with him no matter what. So I think about what trusting in God's faithfulness looks like. I was thinking about some pictures for that, and there's some pictures that stick out to me. One of them is the Jesus picture where he's holding a little lamb. That little lamb is just snuggled up in Jesus' arms. He's just holding it. What is the story we're told? We're told that Jesus is the good shepherd, that he is going to care for and take care of that lamb. He's going to provide, he's going to sustain, he's going to protect for all the needs that lamb might have. For us, this table this morning is a reminder that we had a need. We had a need to be brought into God's family. And Jesus provided and took care of that need for us. He paid the price and the ransom for us. And we ask, can we trust God? Can he be trusted? If when we were in need, God didn't spare his own son, but freely gave him up for us all, will he not also graciously give us all things? God can be trusted. I want to continue with this image, the idea of what it means to really trust God and what that might look like. I think of a little girl, a little 3-year-old girl, climbing up on a rock wall 6 feet high, and she puts out her arms and says, "Daddy, catch me." That's complete faith. That's complete trust in the faithfulness of that father. She doesn't have a doubt. She doesn't have a doubt that her dad can catch her. Why do you know that she doesn't have a doubt that her dad can catch her? Because when she's 6 years old and she's standing on the side of the pool, she's still sticking out her arms and she says, "Daddy, catch me." Right? She doesn't have a doubt. That's what it looks like to trust in faithfulness. That's the picture of faithfulness. The faithfulness is, you know what? That father always caught that little girl. Always caught that little girl so that she was always ready to jump. So you take that and you run it up a couple years. So now she's 27 years old. She's a grown woman, and she climbs up that same rock wall. Is she going to put out her arms and say, "Daddy, catch me"? I hope not. Because things have changed, right? Daddy's the same size. She's not. Daddy's capacity is limited. But our Father's capacity is not. See, sometimes I think that we've forgotten. Maybe we never have even known what it's like to reach out our hands and say, "God, will you catch me?" Sometimes I think that we feel like our life has gotten a little too big and maybe a little too complicated to really put out our arms and say, "God, I know you'll catch me." It's hard to trust him to be faithful. We feel we have to control things, take care of things, work them out. There was a time where God was able to take care of all my 7th grade problems. But you know what? My 11th grade life is a little too big and a little too complicated for God, and I don't know if I can trust him. For Daniel, there wasn't any secret sauce that was unique to Daniel or his friends. It's something available to all of us. We're simply choosing the story we're going to live. Is God a sustainer? Is he a provider? Is he a protector? Does he actually hold my future? Or is he not quite able? What story are we going to choose? Will we see that he is big enough, that I can trust him to be faithful? because that secret sauce is available to us all. I want to pray for us. Jesus, thank you for providing for this table. Thank you for being the firstborn son into our adopted family, the family you have brought us into, that we stand in your name. That as God has been faithful to you, he will be faithful to us. God, I ask you to be with our hearts and our minds. May we examine ourselves to know what story we're choosing. And how we're seeking to walk in the world. Give us the grace to choose you, and the grace and the freedom, even when we don't know it, we can't do it, to trust you, to be faithful to us, that we might be able to sit in you, to snuggle into your arms, to trust you, and maybe reach out our arms and jump and say, Daddy, catch me. In Jesus' name, amen.